Addition and subtraction are already very familiar to us as operations, especially when it comes to basic numbers. We know that 10 plus 7 is 17, 14 minus 8 is 6. We also know that addition commutes. So I can change the order of my addition. So 7 plus 10 is also 17. However, 8 minus 14, when we were in elementary school first learning about this, they said you can't do that because the bigger number had to come first. It didn't make sense taking something bigger from something smaller. But later on, we learned that we can work with signed numbers. And you might remember that you get -6 as an answer. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a methodical way of making sure that we can get there every single time without just remembering or using a calculator. When we're talking about integers, though, we also have to worry about things like -10 plus 7 or -10 minus -7. There's a bunch of different situations we can run into. So let's get going. One very important thing that we need to know before we move on is this concept right here. And that is addition is this, subtraction is the addition of a negative. So let's write that down. And this is something that you're going to want to write down, and you're going to want to try to put this in your mind all the time. It needs to be internalized. Subtraction is the addition of a negative. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have that same idea that we had before where the bigger number goes on top, but we also need to know that absolute value comes into play. And if I want to look at 14 minus 8 as we had above, what I just wrote above here, that subtraction is the addition of negative, that's the same thing as 14 plus a -8. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare the two numbers, 14 and -8. And I'm going to determine which one has a bigger absolute value. And 14 has a bigger absolute value than -8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up as subtraction like we're always familiar with. And I'm going to get 6 as an answer. And that's how I get 6. On the other hand, if I were to have negative or 8 minus 14, which is something that we had a hard time with in elementary school, we can do the same thing. This is going to be 8 plus a -14. And I'm going to look at my two numbers here, 8 and -14. And -14 has a bigger absolute value because its absolute value is 14. So that's going to go on top, and I'm going to get 14 minus 8 again, which is 6. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this negative sign here because the absolute value of the negative was bigger. So I'm going to keep the sign of the bigger absolute value, and I'm going to get -6 as an answer. So that is how we add and subtract integers. And really what it boils down to is subtraction is just the addition of a negative. We get some other situations. I alluded to things like -10. Let's didn't quite do this one above, but let's do -10 plus -7. What we're going to do with this one, I have a negative added to a negative. I'm going to just add 10 and 7 together, and I'm going to keep the sign. And the way I like to think about this is, hey, I owe someone $10 and I borrowed $7 from somebody else. I owe a total of $17. So that would be -17 for me. So I would owe a total of $17 out. And then we have the weird double negatives. So let's do -10 minus a -7 equals, well, I said subtraction is the addition of a negative. So -10 plus, and I'm going to use -7. I use some different grouping symbols there to make sure that I know that I'm nesting some grouping symbols. And what this is asking right here inside those square brackets, -7, it's a mouthful. That's basically asking me what is the opposite of -7. So let's write that down here. That's what that's saying. And if you think about it that way, the opposite of -7 would be +7. So that would be -10 plus 7. And if I want to add 10 and 7 together, or -10 and 7 together, I got to think about the absolute value thing again. And so I'd have 10 minus 7 because the absolute value of -10 is 10. I get 3. And since I had the negative sign on the larger number in absolute value, I keep the sign of the negative in my solution. And that would give me -3. So that's a quick rundown on how to add and subtract integers. And I will see you in the next video when we start talking about fractions.